first perspective from which I would like to challenge the ceiling is how far the ceiling is a disciplinary, so architectural task, and how far not. Here, from these images, I would say not. This is a catalog of home furnishing from an American firm of early 20th century, and different styles of furnishing are coexisting, are coupled with different styles of ceilings. So the ceiling here is becoming just a component in the realm of interior design. And in all the very numerous trade catalogs of the many and many USA manufacturers of false ceiling tiles of that time, the tiles were ordered according to their artistic style. So it was not a matter of architects to design the ceiling. Architects were just requested to select from existing catalogs. So the ceiling was dispossessed from the realm of architecture. Here we are in 1925, a handbook of good taste in an English handbook of good taste in furnishing bourgeois interiors. And here I think we can all agree how the ceiling, this vaulted ceiling, is really part of the aesthetic picture, no? You see the blue carpet, the blue ceiling. I mean, if the ceiling was white, everything was different, and probably it was less beautiful in the intentions, I mean, in the meaning of the illustrator. So here, the ceiling is clearly a part of the aesthetic construction of the interior. Then we split, we shift to the 1950s. This is an office in Greensboro in North Carolina. It was published in Architectural Record. So at that time, it was a big success to be published on this important journal, American Journal of Architecture. And we see this small office with a number of features showing a number of influence from high cultured modern architecture. So you have the at the corner you have a portion of a ribbon window, which is clearly a quotation of Mr. Le Corbusier. You see some marble, probably marble decoration above the fireplace, which shows some influences of Frank Lloyd Wright. You see the linoleum floor, which was probably a prefab element, but it was designed according to a Bauhaus-influenced aesthetic. The only character within this image that is not designed, that is indifferent, is the ceiling. Is just a non-customized grid made of acoustical slash anti-fire or fire-preventing tiles. So the architect, the modern architect, this guy Edward Löwenstein, who was a very important architect for a number of reasons which are out of the history of the ceiling, but I mean, he was really an interesting character. In any case, he was clearly engaged in being a modern architect, but he left the ceiling outside this picture. In the same years, ceilings were becoming the field of experimentation for a number of technical solutions. For instance, in the low-cost suburbs, prefab homes of the US, a new element appeared, which is the luminous plastic ceiling. You see an example here. And this was a ceiling, a smooth ceiling, which was completely overlapping with a fluorescent illumination. And it had the task to give the illusion of a uniform and of course comfortable lighting. So we have the anonymous housewife of the US suburbs, and there to the left we have two persons which are not at all anonymous in the history of modern architecture. You maybe can recognize Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and you maybe recognize the young Phyllis Lambert, the founder of the Canadian Centre of Architecture. They are in front of a maquette of a super famous building in New York, which is the Seagram building, a manifesto of international style. And the Seagram building, completed in 1959 and designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, was all based on luminous ceilings, which were designed by this important character, a light designer whose name was Richard Kelly. So here we have a very interesting migration from a low-cost, non-authored architecture, the suburb home, to the super-authored manifesto, very expensive architecture of the canon of modernity. So paradoxes. And in fact, we can still think that the luminous ceilings of the Seagram buildings, of the Seagram building, are exception in how they are curated, how they are carefully designed as beautiful elements. But nevertheless, we have to admit that mostly the ceilings of our indoor landscapes are indifferent, and they are completely, they are made of the indifferent grid of dropped tiles. So traditionally, looking above is something that is an act that was linked to trying to connect with the supernatural dimension. And I mean, ceiling is becoming really the horizon of our own fate, of our own wishes for the future. And this is very paradoxical, of course. This paradox was, for instance, exploited by the 1960s, 1970 radical avant-gardes. For instance, the Florentine Super Studio designed a gridded ceiling that was meant to go all over the world, or at least on, it was mentioned, it was meant to go on to cover extended regions as a caricature of the gridded ceilings. Gridded ceilings are everywhere, and paradoxically, the producers and the installers of the designers also of drop ceilings are, or for a number of years, they still tried to charge this gridded ceiling with aesthetic ambitions. So that from this 1979 ad of the Celotex company, now not more existing, you see this poor chairman looking at the ceiling, and this ceiling is intended to be beautiful. And I mean, this is really a complete paradoxical thing, because the chairman would, this is a very refined exercise. I mean, he would have been an expert of conceptual art in order to find beauty in the total generic of this grid, which is merely utilitarian, which is not decorated, which is really the opposite of any authorship effort from the side of who designed these buildings. I would like to contrast this image of the guy, this poor chairman, with another guy whom you already seen, I guess, a number of times, and he is Louis Kahn, one of the heroes in the narratives of mid-century modern architecture, or better, one of the first oppositors to the mainstream of modern architecture. Here in this very iconic portrait, he is looking above and he is admiring, as really with some sort of religious inspiration, the ceiling that he designed for the Yale Museum, the first big commission that he got in the first 50s. And this ceiling was designed by Kahn in order to be beautiful and in order also, of course, to be functional, because the ceiling was, this concrete ceiling was also hosting systems, lighting, etc., etc. Kahn was obsessed with the idea of showing the structures of ceilings. And there is an anecdote that I never had the chance to really double check, of Louis Kahn saying, well, I would really I would really do not want to die under a false ceiling. And in fact, he died under a false ceiling because he died in 1971 in the restrooms of Pennsylvania Station. So this photo, I think, is so meaningful of the modern slash postmodern, I don't know, this is not important here, architect still struggling for the beauty of the ceiling, even if the ceiling is not decorated with any symbolical program. On the other hand, modern architects, this is the young Eero Saarinen, because of the fact that they were so focused on the layout of interiors, this is a picture of 1939, they had to overlook ceilings in order to can be in control of their own layouts and really to become the puppet masters of the future inhabitants of their homes. So they had this need of looking inside, and so no ceiling was acceptable. The ceiling was something that was added after the design.